What does it feel like when you see depression happening in your spouse? We talk a lot about what depression feels like for the person experiencing depression, but what does it feel like for the supporting spouse who loves their husband or wife and are seeing these dramatic changes in them? We're going to be talking about that today. If this is your first time here, we are Persevere Together. My name is Josh Canning. This is my wife, Lisa. We help Catholic couples navigate mental illness in their marriage. We've been doing this for a long time ourselves, and we're happy just to crack open this topic today. Lisa, maybe I can just ask you.
Yes, Josh.
If you can take yourself back in time.
First of all, you look so handsome today.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. If you are only listening to audio, I do look handsome. So Lisa, this could be a bit of a raw topic. We talked last week about what depression really feels like from the depressed person's experience, but it's quite a roller coaster for both spouses, isn't it? So if I could ask you just to step back in time for a moment and think about what you were witnessing in 2012 when you saw me falling into a clinical major depressive episode. What was that like? When did you first become really alarmed? Or why don't you just tell me, what you were observing in that time?
There's a really big lack of control. And that can be depending on your upbringing, depending on, what being in control or out of control means to you. That can be very disorienting. And so that's what I remember, in the beginning is that I just no matter what I did, no matter what I set up, whatever systems I put in place, whatever encouragement, whatever, literally anything, whatever I did, I could not control Josh's reaction. Whether it be, there would be things that would get you frustrated or angry, or there would be things that would get you really overwhelmed. Like, even if I would be like, okay, look, I have done A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all you have to do is H. And that would get you overwhelmed. That would be very hard. Anyway, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe the things that normally worked, you've been in a relationship for a long time. There's your spouse, and there's certain things that, maybe they're in normal times, these are triggers, and but you figured out how to navigate them. But now all of a sudden, the things that normally worked aren't working anymore.
I think that's a fair way. And that might not be universal for all. I struggle with control. So for me, this was extremely prevalent, I was so not in control. But that is, I think, a very fair way to summarize it. It's normally you're totally fine watching the kids when I go do, XYZ for an hour, but all of a sudden now you're not. And it can kind of be baffling, I guess, or surprising, or very disorienting for the person supporting. So that's number one. I would say that's where it began. It began a little bit just on the very practical living life together, especially when you have children. Just very practically, it was wait a minute. Why is this normally fine, but now, wow, I feel a real loss of control in this particular area. And then, of course, when depression got very bad for you, and you couldn't get out of bed, there was obviously a lot of concern. So just worry and concern. I think before I understood what mental illness was, I judged Josh a lot. I judged my husband. I was kind of is he just being lazy? Has he lacked an interest in me? Have I done something wrong? So there was a lot of that confusion. And then, of course, when you start to see your spouse, when you can kind of get over all of that, and we've talked a lot on this channel here, we talk a lot about how you do have to understand almost the anthropology of depression, what's happening in somebody's mind when they are going through a mental illness. And that definitely helped me to kind of just understand the reality. He's not being lazy. We talked a lot about that in our last video. This is a very different type of having a bad day, right? So then it gets to the part where it's really hard. We were talking about, I asked you, if you recall last week, I asked you if you had to come up with an analogy, and we were relating it to water, what is it like? And you were I'm drowning, and my head is barely above water. if I may, for the person supporting who's watching when it's becoming like, once you've gotten past some of the practical, some of the like, not like the lack of understanding, maybe the surprise of how mental illness might present in your spouse. Like once you get past that, and now you're starting to just see like the pain and the anguish, what it felt like for me, and still sometimes feels like for me, is like you're spinning in this whirlpool and I'm just like, here's my hand, like just grab it, you know, and it brings tears up because it's like you're wanting just so desperately to help your spouse who you love. And you can't, or you try, and sometimes they grab on, you know, or sometimes you can physically hold them, you know what I mean? Like you're physically like, here, I got you, like by the back of the neck, like I got you, like, you know, it's fine. But then the water is overwhelming, you know, they don't want you to hold on, whatever it is, right? And that, again, that lack of control can be very, very hard, but it's not about the lack of control. I think when you are in a really depressive state, I have a very sincere desire to like hold a mirror up to your face and show you who you really are. Or to like take the glasses off that you view the world with and be like, here, like these are much better. Like these are much better on you.
I can't see anything.
You know, these are much better lens in which to view the world and in which to view yourself. Would you say that's a fair way to sort of explain it?
I mean, what I hear in that is a feeling of desperation to help somebody and to help them see from a different vantage point than they are seeing. Maybe if I can just get you to drill down a little bit more in that. I mean, we've seen many comments from people who watch the videos who are in the same state that you were back then. Maybe just speak to, if you were to put an image to that, like I gave the image of the feeling like drowning. What would, if I was to give the image of, if I was to ask you for an image of what does it feel like to be supporting? Yeah, what comes to mind?
So I think one of the very practical things, especially if you're a parent, that is worth pausing on for a minute here. When your spouse is ill and you have, especially if they're young, it does fall on you to kind of pick up things, right? It falls on you to provide some stability, not only for the children, but for your spouse. It does fall on you to, you know, even just practical things like keep the house clean, keep people fed, like keep laundry, keep, you know, wipe all the butts, you know what I mean? Like, so there's just that practicality that I think is worth mentioning, and that can be overwhelming. And you can feel a sense of, you know, I'm alone. I remember I used that phrase a lot. I remember using the phrase like, I'm a single mom now.
Yeah.
Like I'm a single mom, and we had 3 kids, 3 and under. And I remember being like, I'm a single mom. Yeah. So the visual that comes to mind for me, it's a really funny one, or I'm laughing at it. It's kind of comical to me. It's like we're in side by side whirlpools. I am treading water like crazy in mine. With like a whole bunch of children hanging off me, like literally like hanging onto my shirt, my back, my whatever, pulling on my hair. But I'm also desperately holding my hand out, wanting to give you like, you know, some support.
Yeah, that sounds like a lonely place to be. I know that in the beginning, so we both felt different things about depression when it was happening. I felt ashamed to talk about it with anybody because I didn't feel like I had a good enough reason to be depressed. And I think you were also kind of quiet about it for a while. And part of that's probably being discreet for your spouse. You don't know what they want to be out there or whatnot. But tell me about the feeling that you had about talking about it.
Yeah, and I feel kind of like very vulnerable talking about this because I'm not proud to admit like a little bit of my behavior back then. But there was some self-preservation, I would say, happening in myself. So I didn't want people to judge me. I didn't want people to judge you. I didn't want people to judge like our marriage or the choices we made. Like, you know, especially back then, you know, we have 10 children. Back then I was not as sort of like confident about why we were open to having so many children. And so I had I had this sort of fear that people are going to be like, well, your husband's depressed because you know, you're so open to having so many kids. So of course anybody would get depressed with that many children. Like I had so many, you know, and it feels so raw to say that out loud, but it was just an honest thing I thought back then. I'm not really proud of it, but so I would lie. I would sometimes lie. Like I would sometimes, if we were invited out somewhere and it was just me and the kids, people would say, where's Josh? I'll be like, oh yeah, he had to work today. Or, you know, maybe this is not so much of a lie, like, oh, he just wasn't feeling well, you know? But I definitely was not at all open or transparent with honestly anyone. Like, I'm trying to remember. Like, I honestly think I was only honest when I kind of told the internet. Like, I'm trying to recall. Like,
I get to tear the whole Band-Aid off.
I just tore the whole Band-Aid off. I remember exactly where I was sitting when I said when I wrote my very first blog post on this topic.
Yeah. And then that shifts things, obviously, right? Once it's out there, it's kind of the cat's out of the bag. But I remember when even I told your dad, we were volunteering on the board of a charity. And I think I just told him that I said, Dad, I've been having some struggles with anxiety, you know? So it's funny, even for me, I could say part of the picture. Right. And I was somehow, I had clinical depression and anxiety. I was somehow less ashamed about the anxiety. It's like anxiety almost in my mind. It was like, oh, I just care too much, you know, something like that. But the depression, I don't know. I don't know. Even for me, we talk about stigma a lot, but it had a different connotation that I just didn't want to be open about that. Cause it was like, I was saying like, I'm just too weak to deal with life, you know?
And, you know, being of Filipino descent, I remember at one point asking my parents, this is after we had been very open, you know, and again, a reminder, we've been very open. We've been on national broadcast, you know, opportunities, like nationally broadcasted campaigns and platforms, a commercial during the Super Bowl, like just, right?
Yeah, in Canada. We have worse commercials here. But
anyway, but like, you know, so now we're very, very public about it. And so I remember at one point after we had been a bit more public and a bit more honest, I remember asking my Filipino parents and just saying like, did people talk about mental illness like growing up? And they were like, no, like it was not even like a thing. I think one of my parents said something like, you know, I remember so-and-so having a breakdown, but it wasn't like there was this general conversation of like, I'm having a really hard time right now. Or like, I think this is more than just a bad day. They both just said like, no, it was not. It was just not even something you talked about.
Right. Yeah. I remember that language from like the 80s. Yeah. Somebody had a breakdown, you know, but they didn't really, they didn't go into, you know, what exactly that means. So here's another question. So I know communication can obviously be strained. Communication can be hard early in marriage, period. And it's an area that I guess we can all continually grow in. But how was our communication affected in that time? Like, what would you? And I'm just thinking of the viewer who's maybe having a really difficult time having this conversation with their spouse that they're seeing changes in. What was that communication like? And did you learn anything from that time that we could share?
Oh gosh, I had to learn. I had to learn to get more comfortable with not being in control. And that included hard conversations. And it included not controlling the outcome of conversation. So that took a long time. I'm still a work in progress in that area, but that took a really long time to just be like, it is not a threat right now if you can't control everything, you know? So, and that applied to communication as well. I also had to learn what it would look like to not have things. This is going back to my need for control, but like, and this is not exactly answering your question, but I had very strong pictures for what life would look like. And I've talked about this before a lot. I had to get comfortable with like, just because you don't do it the exact same way you pictured it, you know, it doesn't mean that your marriage is bad or that your life will be like not fulfilling, you know? And in fact, a lot of the adjustments that we made in our lives back then and now, were probably like very good ones. Like it's probably not good to go at the speed that Lisa Canning would like to go at on a daily basis, like, and literally fill every single minute with some kind of productivity. You know, one of the gifts I think of depression, to be honest, for me at least, was just understanding that like you can take life at a slightly more leisurely pace and it can be very nice.
Well, it's good to talk about silver linings, I think, right? So that there's a little, maybe a glimmer of hope. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just add one more thing? I think I also, intimacy is another thing.
Okay.
I don't mean the kind of intimacy you're probably thinking about. I meant more like in communication. I really had to learn even what it looked like to be intimate with my own emotions. I think that was a very hard thing for me as well. I had been somewhat averse to negative emotions. And so I would try to just get rid of them at all costs, either by controlling a situation so that we wouldn't have the negative emotion, or just completely burying and suppressing. I love in Inside Out 2, they have a whole section of the movie on, suppressed or bottled up emotions. And I think it's so funny. It's like literally a vault or a jar, like bottled up, right? So I got very, very good at that. And so in terms of communication, I had to learn, like, it's okay to be honest. It's okay to deal with these very honest feelings. So is that kind of what you heard?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like it sounds like, internal communication was a thing, being aware of things in yourself. And then obviously being delicate in our own conversations. You said, like, not controlling the outcome of conversations. Maybe, do you want to just give an example of how one might communicate to a spouse who seems like they're undergoing depression? How might one maybe approach that conversation of maybe suggesting that maybe something's going on, or suggesting maybe there might be a value in getting a professional opinion on things?
I really wanted to fix everything in the beginning. And so my communication style was often very like commander, like, this is what we're going to do. And it was a little bit like not a conversation.
Right.
It was more like, this is what we're doing. I would encourage you not to do that. And it's so interesting and challenging, because in some ways, I think, like, what a gift it is that I am so type A and so choleric, because I have the capacity when you're having a moment of challenge. Like, I do have the capacity to kind of like, all right, everybody, here we go. Like, I'm leading the way. Like that. I think about that all the time. Like, there are often times when I say, Lord, thank you for gifting me the ability of capacity to handle things, because it's hard sometimes, but I actually have the capacity for it. So thanks be to God. Thank you, Lord. But that may not be, especially in the beginning, the best approach, like just telling somebody what to do. And so my best sort of encouragement and advice is to ask a lot of questions that provide room for reflection. That sounds really hard. Tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Like, how are you feeling today? Oh, wow. I think anybody who would be feeling that way would find that hard.
Yeah.
And so I learned that real quick. And that was a result of going to my own counseling. I think I developed better skills in just asking open-ended questions and not dictating, like, this is how we're going to solve it. Like, and kind of also just like detaching myself from needing to solve everything. Right.
Yeah.
Which, again, when you are the type A choleric like I am, it can be very hard.
Right. You mentioned getting counseling for yourself. Maybe could you say what kind of supports you needed as a supporting spouse during that time, and how did you find them?
I think especially if you can relate to my story where you felt shame, or you felt like you had to, lie, or there was a bit of like whatever, like just you couldn't be honest. That's a lot to carry alone. Like, a lot. Like, think about it. That's like an avalanche. So if you're like what happened in our marriage, where your husband either is, can't get out of bed, or has to be hospitalized, or, like, where just they're absent for a period, whether they're actually absent or they're, just sort of mentally and physically absent. That's a lot to carry. Like, that is a lot. And so just so for example, Catholic Family Services, at least when we were using them as a tool, they had a sliding scale when it came to fees, or many insurance plans will cover things like counseling. And so that was very helpful. Catholic Family Services was sort of the first place we went to in terms of finding counseling. And then, of course, there are licensed therapists that, again, many insurance plans cover, or you can pay out of pocket. And of course, I'm a coach. And so there are coaches who can journey with you as well. But, I think there's a myriad of tools at every sort of price point and every accessibility. Even like I have utilized government funded 24-hour like call lines. I remember there was one particular day, none of my girlfriends who I would typically lean on were available because it was like the middle of the night. Like I'm pretty sure it was like really late at night. Nobody was available. And so I just called one of these helplines, and I remember being like, I feel really bad I'm calling you. Like, I feel like this line is meant for people who are like suicidal. Like, I just really need to talk to somebody. And I remember just the empathy on her voice. She was like, if we just waited till everybody was at the point of like suicide, like that's a problem. No, it's completely appropriate that you called. We are here to listen. And honestly, she just listened. Like she didn't provide honestly anything. Like I feel kind of bad saying that like that, but she just literally was like, wow, I can understand that would be hard. Wow. Yeah, that sounds really overwhelming. She would not provide any direction or any kind of like, have you thought about this? It was literally all just like, wow, I hear you saying that you're really tired. And that provided a lot of, support.
Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense to find support for yourself. The reality is if the mental illness is a bit of an invisible, disease or whatever you want to call it, the supporting somebody like that is also, it can be invisible and probably feel invisible.
And, and this is so vulnerable to say, but you and I have talked about this. It's, so much like at this point, but it's so vulnerable. And I feel like people are going to judge me for saying this, but
go for it.
Whatever. For the person supporting, there can be quite a bit of resentment. Like you do feel, especially in the beginning, or at least this is how I felt. You're just like, I hate mental illness. Or if you don't understand it, you're starting to resent your spouse. So I would say in the beginning, there was some resentment around you. Like, why can't he just get out of bed? Like, why can't he, just like buck up, like figure it out? Like he just needs to like buck up. I think that was another phrase that I used a lot. Yeah. Or is that even the expression? Yeah. Buck up? Anyway, I don't even know what that means.
It's probably a cowboy reference. I don't know. Let us know in the comments.
So then I'm a very big malapropism person. I will use incorrect terms. Speaking to the horse's mouth. Is that the one I always get wrong? Yeah.
One of many.
And one of many I get wrong. So anyway, in the very beginning, there was resentment towards him. And then as I started to understand and obviously did my own work on myself and grew in my empathy, then it became extreme resentment towards mental illness. Like just sort of like, I hate depression. Like depression's ruining our lives, like, whatever. And so then, and I think that's important to note here, because I think that's one of the things for the supporter, like maybe doesn't get talked about because it's a little unpleasant, like but the reality is, especially in the beginning without the tools, you are carrying it a lot, like alone. There's a physical aspect to it. There's a mental aspect to it. There might be a spiritual aspect to it where you're like, Lord, why have you abandoned me? I certainly felt that in the beginning too. Like, Lord, why have you abandoned me? And then you start to understand that this can like help make you holy, and that there's like ways that you can unite yourself to the cross. So there is like, there is hope. There is hope. But I do think that's important. Like the resentment piece was a very challenging thing for me.
Well, I'm glad, and thank you for being transparent and vulnerable and sharing that, because I really, hope that this video is speaking to the heart of people who are navigating difficult feelings like this themselves. I loved where you were going with that about how the way it looked in the moment isn't exactly how it looks now. And you see how God, it felt like abandonment, but then you have a different vantage point now. Maybe could you just speak a little bit about how you have grown as a person or spiritually by being in that difficult role in which you were in supporting a spouse with depression?
I mean, and this is probably a whole other video, right? But when you can understand that suffering can lead you to greater intimacy with the Lord, and when you can accept that intimacy with the Lord is so for your benefit, and then furthermore, if you can accept that the nature of God, like he is good. I think those are the three things. I've already forgotten what they are. Number one,
suffering.
That suffering can lead you to intimacy. Number two, that intimacy with the Lord is a great thing to have. And then number three, remembering that God is good. His nature is good. And so if you believe that his nature is good, you know that the things that he allows are for you. Like he's not some trickster. He's not some like I don't know, puppeteer, just being like, I'm going to play with Lisa's brain today. No, he's not like that. That's not the behavior of somebody who is good. And again, that's a whole other video. I feel like there's all kinds of beautiful theology around that. But just in short, for the purposes of today's conversation, in the beginning, it was super hard, and it was hard for a few years. But then when you can utilize some of these human tools, and when you can understand, like, okay, I'm not going to run from this. I'm going to embrace the suck. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to do what I can, that, like what I can control, to help myself and help my spouse. And then ultimately just trust the entire process to the Lord. You can make it. You really can. We've been doing this for a really long time.
It sounds like depression has, though it's something that I wouldn't wish on anybody, and including myself, it sounds like it's something that has helped us kind of grow and becoming more human and more,
I think
feeling.
It softened me in a way I probably really needed it. And, when I look at my life timeline, in our married life, at least, and I look at the different things the Lord has allowed or hasn't, many of those things have been around my need for control. And I am grateful, because I think I am a more, wouldn't you say, a much more tolerable person to be around?
I would say you're pretty tolerable before, but I think I have seen tremendous growth in you, obviously, over the years.
My word.
And, perhaps on that note, we could maybe I could just end with a thank you for all of your support over these years, and for the ways in which you've grown, and the ways in which you've drawn near to the Lord through all this, and been an inspiration to me. So thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. I love you. I have one final thing to say.
Okay.
And that's something that I share with my coaching clients a lot. And that is the question, what's the alternative? So I could stay in resentment. I could stay in anger. I could stay in bitterness. I could be like, this is all on me. This is so annoying. Like, I could stay there. And what are the fruits of that?
Right.
No fun, and like, just like, no fun. Like, I don't want to live a life that's full of bitterness and resentment. And so at some point, I definitely made a conscious choice. Like, I need to embrace this as something that I am also going through. Like, it's not just Josh and he just has to figure it out. I need to embrace, because we are married, and like our lives are entwined, like just on a very practical level, but like from a covenantal, like all the promises you make, like in the sacrament of marriage, right? We are entwined on this. It's not just his problem to figure out. Can I fix it all? Can I drag him to therapy? No, of course not. But I can see this as a shared cross, as opposed to something to resent.
I hope this has brought value to you, and thanks again, Lisa, for your vulnerability and transparency. If there has been an insight that struck you, please feel free to share that in the comments. Always feel free to join us at perseveretogether.locals.com, perseveretogether.locals.com. We love to keep the conversation going over there. And if this is your first time joining us, welcome. We talk about this stuff all the time. We believe that God will give you the grace in your marriage to persevere together. So keep going. God bless you.